The boy in the trunk, the DC sniper case. What happens when a man with a military past, a teenage shadow, and a god complex declares war on an entire city and no one sees him coming? This is the story of the DC sniper. 2 months, 10 victims, 1 blue sedan. The terror wasn't just the violence, it was the silence, the randomness, the idea that death could come from anywhere. A parking lot, a gas station, the sidewalk outside a school. But this isn't just a true crime story. This is a study in manipulation, strategy, and the eerie calm of a boy raised into a weapon. Let's get into it. The white sedan. The parking lot was nearly empty when the blue Taurus pulled in. It was dusk, the kind of hazy gray light that made everything blur at the edges. The car rolled slowly, silently, its engine barely audible over the wind. A white box truck idled across the lot, unremarkable, the kind that passed unnoticed 100 times a day. But inside the trunk of the Taurus, something was shifting. Not cargo, not luggage, intent. Miles away, people were finishing dinner. Parents turned off the news. No one knew that. In that moment, a man was checking the range on a custom hole carved out of the back of the car's trunk. It was no longer just a sedan. It was a weapon. Lee was quiet. He always was. Even as a kid, his face stayed flat while the world around him cracked and broke and burned. In his silence, there was calculation. Not anger, never rage, more like cold math. His hands were steady as he placed the scope against the groove in the metal, lining it with the hole in the trunk. He whispered something, but the boy beside him didn't catch it. John called him son, though the boy wasn't. Not by blood. But in this closed world of code words and preparation, they moved like family, like soldiers. The boy Malik, barely 14, watched the rearview mirror. He didn't flinch anymore. The first time he had, John had told him, "Don't blink when destiny speaks." So now he didn't. He just watched. The parking lot lights flickered on, slow and delayed. The figure walking across the pavement didn't see the car. Why would they? A Taurus in the corner of a shopping center was just another shadow. The person pulled out their phone, leaned into their coat, and walked without urgency. John's breath slowed. Lee's finger found the trigger. And then, nothing. Because this isn't the story of the moment. It's the story of the lead-up. The why. The how. The two souls who circled one another in a dark orbit until they landed in the capital with a plan that didn't look like a plan. It looked like confusion, fear, chaos. The news would later call it a spree, but it wasn't that. Not to them. This was structure. This was mission. A different town. A different lot. A different face. The headlines hadn't started yet. Not yet. But they would. Quiet like him. Malik had stopped thinking in full sentences. It was all images now, flashes that rose and fell like static on an old television. The hole in the back of the car, the click of the trunk closing, the sound of breath being held. He didn't know when his mind had started moving like this. Maybe back in Antigua, before the trip, before John, before the lessons. John had a way of speaking that made everything else feel like noise. At first, Malik had just wanted someone to tell him what to do. Then he wanted someone to tell him who he was. John did both. "You got a calling," John had told him, eyes hard, but voice soft. "God doesn't waste boys like you." At night, when they parked the car under trees and used blankets as curtains, Malik would lay in the back and stare at the roof, listening to the engine tick cool. He didn't feel scared. He didn't feel anything. And that, he thought, was maybe the scariest part. John was always calm. His stillness wasn't peace. It was belief, the kind that burrowed under your skin and rewrote your wiring. He talked about systems, about justice, about what people deserved. The more Malik listened, the more the world began to make sense, not like school or rules or logic, but like rhythm, a dark music that played beneath everything. And in that rhythm, the trunk became a pulpit, the rifle became a ritual, and Malik became invisible, a ghost with a purpose. He remembered the first time John let him look through the scope. "You see how small they look?" John whispered. "From back here, they don't even seem real." That stuck with him, the way distance changed everything, how the farther away you were, the less you felt. It was like shrinking the world until nothing could touch you. But sometimes, Malik would still dream. Not of the faces, never the faces. Those blurred away like fog on glass. What came back were the spaces, parking lots, gas stations, grass medians near shopping centers, normal places, quiet places, haunted only by the knowledge of what they were about to become. He'd wake up sometimes with sweat in the middle of his palms, like his body remembered more than his mind did. John would notice. "You ain't weak," he'd say. "You're waking up to the truth." Malik didn't argue. What would be the point? He wanted to be strong. He wanted to be chosen. He wanted to believe that this wasn't just chaos dressed up in camouflage, that this meant something, that God really was watching. So he said nothing. He learned to breathe steady. He learned to walk soft. He learned to be quiet, just like John. Everyone and no one. They didn't stay in one place long, always moving, always circling, a different overpass, a different gas station, a different stretch of pavement where someone might stop just long enough to never move again. Malik sat in the back seat most of the time, watching, learning. Every moment John didn't speak was still a kind of lesson. He moved with precision, like a man who believed time owed him something. His hands on the wheel, his eyes on the mirrors, never nervous, just patient. But out there, outside the car, the world was starting to come undone. News reports were multiplying. First a single victim, then two. By the end of the week, panic had a pulse. People were walking in zigzags. Gas stations felt like war zones. Kids weren't going to recess. Anchors on every major channel used words like random and senseless. But to Malik, nothing about it felt random. Not from the inside. Not from the calm hum of the sedan. In here, it felt like math. Deliberate, rehearsed, sacred. Still, something had started to shift inside him. It wasn't guilt, not yet. It was more like friction. As if the things John had been saying about divine purpose, about justice through fear, were getting harder to hear over the echo of sirens on the motel TV. One afternoon, in a rundown parking lot behind a discount store, Malik stared at a newspaper vending box. He didn't touch it, just looked. The headline screamed back at him, "Who is the DC sniper?" Below that, a grainy black and white photo of a police sketch. Just an outline. Eyes like his. Shadowed face. Every detail and no detail. Everyone and no one. He turned and walked back to the car. "They think it's a white guy," John said with a smirk, eyes never leaving the rear view. "America always does." Malik didn't laugh. He just nodded. Later that night, the dream came again, only this time it wasn't a parking lot. It was his mother's voice, distant, warped, like it was being played through a fan. She was singing, a song from back home. The words were familiar but empty, like a language he used to know. He woke up with his hand curled around the rifle like a teddy bear. John noticed. Of course he did. "You're still becoming," he said. "You're still soft in places." "I'm good," Malik whispered, voice dry. John didn't answer, just stared through the windshield at the motel across the street. Two figures walked under the flickering sign. For a second, they looked like shadows caught between worlds. That was the trick, Malik thought. To move like that. Not seen, not unseen. Something in between. A ghost. With a gun. And a gospel. Voices on the radio. By now they were everywhere. Maryland, Virginia, D.C. The map was dotted with fear. Gas stations installed tarps to shield customers. Schools kept children indoors. Talk radio buzzed with theories, angry callers, frustrated cops, and psychics claiming to have visions. One man said the sniper was guided by demons. Another said it was God. John turned the volume down. "They're starting to listen now," he said, like it was part of the plan. His tone held no excitement, only inevitability. Fear gets in the blood. That's when the message lands. Malik didn't respond. Something in his chest was starting to crack, not shatter, not yet, but crack like old paint under pressure. He could feel it in his hands, too. A tremor when he lit a cigarette, a hesitation when he picked up the rifle. Not because he didn't know how, because part of him wasn't sure why anymore. The mission was shifting. He remembered when it started with targets, surveillance, patterns. But lately it felt like chaos dressed in routine, like John was chasing a feeling instead of a result. At the last stop, a man had just stepped out of a minivan with a bag of groceries. Malik hadn't looked through the scope that time. He stared at the sky instead. Birds were migrating overhead, moving in perfect formation. He envied them, their unspoken code, their unity. No words, no confusion, just instinct. The shot rang out anyway. The man collapsed, and the world trembled a little more. That night, parked behind an abandoned warehouse, Malik finally spoke. "Do you ever think about what happens next?" John looked up from his notebook. He had been writing again, letters, ideas, a plan Malik hadn't been invited into. Not fully. "What do you mean?" "After this, after the last one, after they know it's us." John's eyes narrowed. "They don't get to know us." "But they will." John leaned in. "They'll know what we show them, nothing more." Silence. Malik turned away, but the questions didn't. In his dreams, the voice of his mother was getting louder, more real. She wasn't singing now, she was asking him something, repeating it, a question he couldn't make out. Every time he reached for her, she faded, swallowed by the image of a spinning shell casing hitting pavement. In the morning, he turned on the motel TV. They had a name now. Police were connecting dots. Investigators were tracking phone calls. The FBI had picked up heat signatures and linked vehicles. And then his face, not clear, not identified, but a blurry camera, still from a convenience store. His shape, his walk. Malik stared at it like it was someone else. John came out of the bathroom, towel around his neck, calm as ever. "They're looking," he said, smiling. Malik nodded. "They're getting close." And for the first time since it began, the boy wasn't sure if that scared him or if he was starting to hope. boxed in. The car was parked in the shadows between two interstate rest stops. Long-haul trucks rumbled nearby, engines purring like beasts at rest. The Taurus sat silent, still pretending to be ordinary. Malik lay in the back, staring up at the trunk's ceiling, where the rifle had once been mounted. Now it was beside him, wrapped in a blanket. Not out of fear, John never feared, but because it was almost over. They both felt it. "We send the message tonight," John said, sipping warm water from a gas station bottle. "Then we rest." Malik didn't ask what the message was. He wasn't sure it mattered anymore. The lines in his mind had blurred. What once felt like divine calling now resembled inertia, like a machine that kept running long after the operator had stopped believing. John still believed, or maybe he had simply gone too far to admit otherwise. That night, the stars were hidden behind clouds. The moon was nowhere. The world felt blind. Malik didn't sleep. They came at dawn. Silent, calculated, federal agents in body armor, rifles raised, black boots moving through grass like wind. They'd tracked the car. They'd triangulated the last payphone call. The blue Taurus was no longer a mystery. It was the final puzzle piece. The knock on the window wasn't a knock. It was a command, a shatter. Malik sat up slowly, hands raised. No sudden moves. John didn't resist. He just smiled, like a man who saw the end not as defeat, but as punctuation. Later in custody, Malik stared at his own reflection in the interrogation room mirror. It looked like a photograph of someone else. He was tired, hollow, but somewhere behind the fatigue was clarity. A question, finally decoded. What was all of this for? Was it justice? A statement? Was it punishment for sins only John believed in? Or was it something smaller? Loneliness that turned into manipulation? Pain dressed up in prophecy? He didn't have the words, but he had the silence. And sometimes, silence was an answer. The media went into frenzy. Photos, names, trial schedules, debates about youth and influence, headlines that screamed for justice and retribution. But Malik didn't read them. He was somewhere else now, inside, outside, neither. In the courtroom, when asked to speak, he said very little, not because he didn't want to, but because he didn't know who to speak for. Himself, John, the ghost of a boy who only wanted to be seen. They sentenced him. He nodded. Years later, a reporter would write. He never seemed angry. Just gone. But those who looked closer, those who sat across from him in prison visitation rooms, sometimes said otherwise. They said there was still something in his eyes, not coldness, not madness. Remorse, maybe. Or awakening. Something human. Buried, but alive. Like a whisper through a rifle barrel, finally fading into silence. 5 ways the DC sniper could have gotten away with it. Ditched the car. The blue 1990s. Taurus became the undoing. Switching vehicles often could have kept police one step behind. No phone calls. The mistake was arrogance. Contacting police gave law enforcement a digital breadcrumb trail. Vary the weapon. Using the same rifle and pattern created a forensic signature. Switching weapons or calibers could have bought more time. Avoid personal zones. Some attacks happened near places John had lived or worked. Psychological profiling closed the gap. Cut the messages. Leaving notes and hints inflated ego. But it also gave the task force more data points. 5 questions. You'd probably ask, and we want you to answer in the comments. Do you think the boy was brainwashed, or was he already broken before John? Could the sniper attacks have been prevented earlier? Was this terrorism, revenge, or just trauma with a trigger? Why do we focus more on John than Malvo? If Malvo walked out tomorrow, would you feel safe? Drop your answers in the comments. I want to know how you see it. Support the channel. Pay your tribute. CashApp, $forrestjob. PayPal. A Divine Destiny, LLC, @gmail.com. Your donations keep this channel raw, real, and running. If this episode hit, leave an offering. Subscribe for more crime stories that cut deeper. https://www.youtube.com channel UC via ripe SDs RDJMXTZ7XBW sub confirmation 1. New episodes weekly, less sensationalism, more substance. We don't just tell stories, we dissect them.